Thank you all for coming. This session is going to be about the rewards and challenges of transparency and looking at some of the sort of issues and ethics around open data and what that might mean. And we've got a very interesting and diverse panel, I have to say, coming into this. You're going to hear, first of all, from Tim, who recently stood in the local elections for the Pirate Party, to talk about sort of copyright and licensing issues. It's going to be followed by Amir, who's a GP from Tameside, who's been looking at the most private sort of data that you'll ever imagine, you know, all our patient records and how to deal with that and the ethics around that. Following on from that, Jordan will be talking. Jordan is talking from a more legal perspective about some of those rewards and challenges that we face. And finally, Chris from Openly Local tells me he's going to talk about failure. So we're going to run the full gambit really here. So welcome to our panel, and we'll kick off with Tim. If you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself as you sort of start your presentation, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Actually, I'm a parliamentary candidate for the Pirate Party, not a local candidate. So what if I said to you that the pirates aren't always the bad guys? What if I said to you that pirates are sometimes some of the most creative people in the world? Anyone who uses information can be branded as a pirate. If you photocopy a page from a book, or if you download a song from the internet, you can be branded as a pirate. If you sing Happy Birthday in public, in the eyes of the law, you are a pirate. Musicians thought Thomas Edison was a pirate when he invented the phonographic record player. Instead, he helped musicians reach new audiences and created the record industry. In Brazil, doctors reverse-engineered Western drugs so that even the poorest in society could get the treatment that they needed. Some businesses try to beat pirates. Smart businesses can beat pirates by copying them. Whilst the record companies took on music pirates in the courts, Steve Jobs beat the record companies and the pirates by competing with them in the marketplace with the iTunes Store. So, who's heard of the Digital Economy Act? Has a few hands? Yep. So this piece of legislation was pushed through the last few weeks of the previous Parliament. It was passed without really going through a committee stage, which some of you will know is the stage of the parliamentary process where a bill is looked at a line-by-line level. And 25,000 people wrote to their MPs stating that they were unhappy with how the bill wasn't being given due process. But anyway, there are more pressing problems than this. The bill allows rights holders, so that is to say the music and film lobbies, which have been, I must say, very vocal in pushing through this piece of legislation. But it allows them to disconnect subscribers to an internet service who they believe to be infringing copyright. Now, we don't think that disconnecting subscribers is a proportional punishment. You know, you find people who are running small businesses off the internet, students who are learning, who are submitting their dissertations using the internet. Disconnection from the internet produces unknown consequences. We believe that, you know, a small fine would be a much more proportional punishment to something like committing copyright infringement on the internet. So, has anybody here actually heard of the Pirate Party? A few, even more hands. Excellent. You're all experts. So the Pirate Party believes that politics needs to change for the 21st century. We're quite a new party. We're just over a year old. But we've got 900 members and stood 9 candidates in the general elections. We would have stood 10, but somebody got caught on the wrong side of some volcano ash, which stopped them signing the papers in time. What we want to do is we want to reform copyrights and patents. We want to legalise non-commercial file sharing and reduce the excessive copyright term to ensure that both the artists and the consumers get a fair deal. We want to end excessive surveillance. We want to reduce the amount of tracking and of innocent people by the government and large businesses. And above all, we want to ensure real freedom of speech so that everybody can participate in our shared culture by reforming libel law and stopping companies hiding questionable activities. What is being done with open data is really putting the power into the hands of the people by allowing them to innovate with this data without being branded as pirates. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I'm sure people are going to have quite a few questions about particularly the reform of copyright and libel laws, which we'll be able to come to. What we're going to do is each of the presentations, quite quick, and then throw it open to you for Q&A at the end, if that's okay with everyone. Okay, so Amir.
Right, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm a full-time GP in Hyde, which is West Manchester, East Manchester rather, and I'm also the primary care IT lead for NHS North West. So for those of you that are from abroad, I'm in charge of looking at the IT deployment outside of a hospital setting in the community. I say in charge, supporting it. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about real-time digital medicine. And I start with this cartoon that I first started using about 3 years ago. And it's a patient in the waiting room, and they're being asked, they're joining the practice. It says, do you drink, do you smoke, do you exercise, do you Yahoo? Does everyone Yahoo here? Yeah, that was 3 years ago. It's a silly question, really, isn't it? Because, of course, it's not Yahoo anymore, it's Facebook. So how many people here have Facebook? Yeah, just about, but, of course, that was kind of last year as well, isn't it? It's Twitter now. How many Twitter here? Yeah, okay. If I was in an NHS audience, by the way, there'd be one person who put their hand up for that question. So it gives you some kind of idea of the sort of challenges we've got. But I'm going to start with this. This is a quote from actually Hippocrates, 463-77 BC, that says, everyone has a doctor in him or her. We just have to find it. I'm sorry, I don't know what's happened there. We just have to find it. But actually, that's not where we are at the moment, because many of you will know that culture eats technology for breakfast, but hopefully technology has an opportunity to start to shape some of that culture. But what is that culture that we're looking at? Well, it starts with, trust me, I'm a doctor. And I'm sure some of you get this feeling when you go and see the doctor or nurse and they've got a gun at their head and they're saying, I, the doctor, am always right. Do as I say, but not as I do. Make me cross at your peril because I can make your life hell. Your job is to keep me happy. So if I become unhappy, then you've got a problem. So, whatever I say, do it. Changing doctors isn't going to make a difference. If you go down to the GP down the road, it's not a problem because we're all one big cartel and we are still in charge. It's no different. And I thought the last one was really good. I'm perfect and you're stupid, so just sit down and just listen to what you're doing. And some of you might sort of get, being a bit facetious, but some of you might get a feeling of this is what things are like, and not just here in England, but throughout the world. Of course, there is something else that you guys are also very aware of, and the cartoon sort of depicts this as, well, maybe these doctors aren't quite as perfect as everyone imagines. And for those of you at the back who can't see, it's the doctor saying, take this paper cup on a string and call me in the morning. And the receptionist at the back saying, OK, I think it's safe to say Dr. Jones is behind the technology curve. So maybe there is something there that patients and the public can support us with. Maybe we aren't quite as perfect as we can be. OK, let's get back to some of the reality stuff. And the reality is we've got a demographic time bomb that's ticking away right throughout the world. So it doesn't matter whether you're just in England or whether you're in Africa or the States. Here's a graph showing what was predicted in terms of at what point will we have more people above 65 and over, which is this line over here, and those below 16. And it was predicted that by about 2014 in England, we will have more elderly people than young. Unfortunately, we hit that point in 2001. It was sooner than we'd predicted. Not only that, but by the year 2050, we reckon 4 times as many people are going to need to be cared for than we have now. And that's going to be at 4 times the current cost. And we've heard in the news about the problems of how do we support social care and healthcare and everything else. And remember, the costs are not just around healthcare and social care. It's costs to you, it's to society, it's to business, etc., etc. how are we going to meet that challenge? How are we going to be able to provide the care that's needed? How are you going to feel comfortable that when you're grandparents, that you're going to get the same sort of care or better care than what your grandparents are receiving now? That's the challenge. This is a really busy slide, and I apologise for putting it up there, but it's mainly for those that see the PowerPoint afterwards. But what this is about is 4 years ago, they looked at who was Googling, who was searching on the internet, and what types of things were they searching at. This was an American piece of research. There's no reason to believe why this would be any no different to what we have here. What they found was 80% of people that were searching on health issues were doing it on one of 17 topics. What they found was that the typical kind of person who was searching on health information were women, internet users younger than 65, college graduates, those with more online experience, and those with broadband access at home. That's important because Digital England means that we now want broadband to happen everywhere, and more people are gaining experience of using the internet. What do we know about these people that were doing the searches? Well, 48% of them were doing it on behalf of somebody else, 36% were doing it for themselves, 53% actually said that the last search had had some kind of positive impact on the next interaction that they'd have with any clinician, doctor, nurse, or allied health professional. 74% found that the knowledge that they'd gained had been really helpful and had given them more confidence in being able to ask issues or bring issues up at the table that they might not have otherwise done. But most importantly, or worryingly, 25% of those that had done a search had been overwhelmed by what they'd seen, had become very upset by some of the graphic nature of what they saw, and become frightened. So there is a kickback with if you start Google searching, you might see things that upset you. Okay, now I'm going to take you straight back to where I've come from. I've done a surgery this morning, and I'm going to shoot back to do my surgery in the afternoon. And this is my consulting room, patient, computer, and me, and there are 3 experts in that room. I'm going to start with the patient. Anyone, any ideas on why a patient would be an expert? What expertise do they have? Yes, they know themselves. They know what symptoms they've got. So this patient might have come to me with back pain, and she'll tell me about what's been going on with the back pain, how it's affecting her. She's actually got more knowledge than just about the back pain that's affecting her. It might be that the family are thinking about booking a holiday, and it's a walking holiday up to the Lake Districts, and she can't quite decide whether the family should book that holiday or not because they don't quite know whether the back pain is going to affect her ability to walk. So she's got expertise about herself, but also the surroundings around her. I'd like to think I've got some expertise. What's my expertise? My training. So my knowledge about back pain, how to assess it, what investigations to do, and everything else. Is there any other knowledge that I have besides how to deal with back pain? Yeah, what else is there that I know about?
Interpreting patients' worries.
Yep, ideas, concerns, and expectations is the medical knowledge for medical terms for that. But actually, it's about when she comes to me and says, what are the local orthopaedic surgeons like? What about osteopathy? What about physiotherapy? What about this cream that you've heard of? And I immediately conjure up in my mind the last 10 patients that I've seen in the last few weeks with back pain, or the letters that have come back from the back surgeons. So I've got expertise, not just about how to manage, but also what the local services are like. Of course, when this patient comes in to see me, I don't know from Adam or Eve, but I've got this computer system, and that computer system on there has got descriptions of the things that she suffers with, the previous consultations that she's had, tests and investigations that she's had, letters that she's had back from the hospital, and I can look at that to provide me with knowledge. The other thing that it provides me with is guidelines, protocols. How should you manage someone with diabetes or back pain or whatever else it might be? So that computer helps me to become much more effective. Now, this is the point. Can you imagine if that computer could face the patient, so the patient could also see that very same data that I'm using, could see that very same knowledge that I'm using on how to assess back pain, so that when she comes to see me, she's got something that she can say, do you think this might work or that might work based on the knowledge that you've been using, doctor? Let's go a stage further. I'm trusting her to tell me as much as possible about the condition that's affecting her. She's trusting me to ensure that I give her the best that medicine can offer. And if we can build a partnership of trust between us and use that computer to support the two of us, then we move into a very, very exciting place. And that's what I call the partnership of trust, and is the basis upon everything else I'm going to talk about. Because I believe there's a paradigm shift taking place right before our eyes. What's the basis of that paradigm shift? Well, step one was we needed to move from a paper-based system to an IT-based one. In England now, 99.9% of GP surgeries are fully IT. In other words, they're recording, and that was what was needed. We needed to move to an electronic way of recording everything. Step 2 was we needed the internet to be everywhere. Now, 70% of the households in the UK do have broadband. You've got things like the library. You've got the Digital Britain policy that I was talking about, where every single individual will have access to the internet. You've got things like the smartphones and iPhones and everything. Internet's everywhere. The other thing that's happened is when I first started 10 years ago as a GP, patients didn't know what I was doing. So when I put a stethoscope on their chest, I was doing some kind of voodoo. But as a result of things like ER, Holby City, Casualty, the TV programs, the radio, the MMR debate on the radio and everything, there is a general rise in the level of understanding of healthcare matters. So there's increase in health literacy. The fourth, that very same record that I'm using to support patients with, patients can now access, and I'm going to show you that. The fifth was it's no good being able to look at your record unless you can do something with it. So that's where patients having choice becomes really important. If I've got depression, doc, do I want talking therapies or do I want medicines? And then the final, and this is now starting to become apparent, that when you do offer patients real choice on the treatments that they offer, you get better outcomes. Why do you think that might be? Yeah, for who? Yeah, the patient has more control, takes more responsibility. They can turn around and say, I can see the benefits of talking therapies, but I know I'm not going to be able to get away from work, so you might as well give me a tablet. Or, I don't like the side effects of those tablets. I'm sensitive to everything known to man, but I really like the idea of going to talk to somebody. If they get buy-in and they understand that it's 6 sessions and not 2 sessions when they feel like, they're more likely to turn up, they're more likely to get the benefits from it. So, let's now move. What do I need? What do you need for care? Believe it or not, there are 8,760 hours in a year. And the typical patient in this country spends about 3 or 4 hours with any clinician. That's doctor, nurse, podiatrist, or whoever it might be. That pie chart is trying to depict the 8,760 hours, and there's a very thin sliver there, which is this time they spend with a doctor or nurse. And the key point is that besides that 3 or 4 hours, you're on your own. You're looking after yourself. Even everyone in this room now, you're not with a doctor in front of you, so you've got to look after yourself. And the question is, what is it that you can do to look after yourself? Now, I want you to keep hold of that little chart and remind yourself of it. I'm going to put it into the corner, and we're going to start talking about what my patients do. We've enabled patients to access their medical records online, and it starts with, on the front of our practice website, www.htmc.co.uk. So those of you that have got the internet now or after this talk, go to the website and look at it. Start to see. We've got 12,200 patients, and on there we are teaching people how to access their records, what to do with them. And there's a control panel, and over here it says you can book an appointment online, you can order prescriptions online, you can access your records online, and that's little videos that shows you how to do it. And then down here is a self-care section where it's no good just providing data. If you're going to provide data, make damn certain people understand what the data means. So over here we've got the self-care section, which helps you to understand what back pain is, what diabetes is, what heart disease is, and so on. And there's various sections, and I'll show you a bit more of that. What does it look like? When you want to order prescriptions, you come to this screen, you can see all the appointments with all the different doctors, and you just click on the one that you want, a bit like trainline.com or when you're booking holidays online or whatever. You can order prescriptions online. So these are the prescriptions. This is how to take them. Because it's taking the data straight off the server, it actually shows you when was the last time you ordered the prescription. And it's hard to see, but next to each of those little tablets is a little I button. It's a little information button. What do you think that does when you click on it? Yeah, it explains what the tablet is. So instead of that little scrappy bit of paper that you normally hand in, and I don't know what those tablets are and what they're for, you press on the little blue button and it tells you more. And it's basically a web link to information to tell you about what the drugs are. They can access their records, and this is the summary information. It shows the allergies, what medications they're on. It shows the significant active problems that the patient has in date order as well as in system order. So these are the heart problems, these are the chest problems, these are the tummy problems, and so on. They can see their consultation. So the patients that I've seen this morning, I've written a history, I've done an examination, plan of action, I've hit the file button, and as they walk out the door, they can now access their record. Believe it or not, I've got patients who are sat in the waiting room waiting for me on an iPhone, looking at their record, reminding themselves of the last few consultations that they've had, the last letters that they've had, that's a letter, test results that they've had. So they're not coming in saying, what's the results of my test? They've already seen that. They've already been to websites to look at what the tests mean, and they want to have a chat about what should we do next. How much more exciting is that? I mentioned the fact that they need to be able to understand what the information is, and Map of Medicine is the evidence-based tool that's been designed by clinicians for clinicians. It's available through NHS Choices for patients and the public. So on our website, on the homepage, you can see Map of Medicine. If you click on it, you'll see the top sort of 350 or so pathways, and when you click on that, you can actually see the pathway. It starts in blue, which is general practice or primary care, and changes to blue. It starts in green and changes to blue. So from primary care, general practice to secondary care hospitals. And it gives you the evidence base on how to do a history, what examinations, what investigations you should do. It provides the why should we follow this? What's the evidence that says we should follow this pathway? And it's all freely available. Those of you that are abroad, I recommend that you do it whilst you're here in England, because some of this is not as viewable outside the country, but it is whilst you're here. So what does this all mean in real life? Here is a blog that one of my patients wrote 3 years ago, in 2007. I'm a 30-something mum looking after a small child, a part-time job, a husband, a house. The list goes on and on. I also have diabetes, an underactive thyroid gland, fertility problems, suffer with depression, asthma, and recently started medication to protect my kidneys. I don't have time to be ill. In 2007, I was introduced to my electronic medical record access. I now order my prescriptions, book my appointments to see the doctor, check my test results, and sometimes I even go over the conversation I had in my consultation with the doctor when I feel I need to clarify issues, to understand my medical needs better. I feel I'm taking a positive step towards maintaining a healthy life, understanding my medical needs, and doing it all on my time when it's convenient for me. I shop online, I communicate online, I educate myself online, I control my finances online. In 2007, it's only right that I should look after myself online. That's a blog in 2007. We are now in 2010 and wondering what's going on. This is the point. She's not alone. In our practice, we've now got over 800, 900 patients accessing their records. Here is an age thing from 0 to 4 right through to 90 plus, and this is percentages. And what you can see is that those people between 45 and 75, the people who are developing diabetes, obesity, heart disease, hypertension, depression, are the ones who are coming forwards to say we want access to the records. And at the moment, it's around 12% of that population. And I can tell you now, the numbers are starting to rocket. That's telling me that we've hit the sweet spot and more people are now starting to come forwards. However, there are some fears. What are those fears? Don't know anything about record access. Did any of you know, by the way, that you can access your medical records online? No, so even in this audience, and you're 5 standard deviations ahead of everybody else, nobody knows about it. Don't know why IT might help. No time to introduce another change. I'm much too busy. I'm inundated with inappropriate requests anyway. This is just another one. I'm really fearful of being found out that I've done something wrong. It's a free-for-all, and that can't be right. There are no guidelines, so I don't really know how to do it. And they won't understand it anyway. Now, who am I talking about there? Doctors, yes. Who else could I be talking about? Patients, yeah, absolutely, because patients are also incredibly busy people. They haven't got time for all this either. And who else could I be talking about? The system. The system might turn around and say, you can't do this for all these reasons. So, what's the solution? Well, we need to spread the word, which is why I really would like to thank the organisers for inviting me to come down here to say we can do this now, you can see how to do it. There are a couple of websites, the International Council for Medical Care and Compunetics. We are trying to produce a paper to go to the World Health Organization because we believe that as a basic fundamental human right, every patient should be able to access their records in whichever part of the world they're in. If you want to get involved in that or look at it, look at the website. We've got the Record Access Collaborative, which are a group of clinicians and system suppliers that are looking at how we can enable this, and of course my website. Don't know why it might help? Well, we need to explain why it might help. Use stories, describe things when things haven't worked the way you would have liked, and also let's try and describe areas where, if you did have the access, how it would help. My patients are doing that on many platforms at the moment. We haven't got time. Well, we need to make time. And how do we do that? Well, we've got to invest in time so that we save it later. I saw a patient who's come back 4 times to surgery, spent 45 minutes waiting. She could have spent that time just accessing a record to find the test results. But she'd never been told that, and so she kept waiting. So let's try and turn things around, invest a little bit of time, get the access, and it'll save you in the long run. Inundated with inappropriate requests. We've had our service for 4 years. We've got 900 patients. it's never been a problem. Patients do not find it difficult. If you provide the right information in the right manner, they do understand it, and they don't start coming in saying, I don't understand this, that, and the other. Fear of being found out. What's that about? That's doctors saying, I'm worried that someone's got a test result that shows they might have diabetes, and actually we've forgotten and we've just filed it. Well, actually, that record will still stay in the record until someone looks at it. So it's really important that we get away from this idea that the doctors are perfect and start saying, we're not perfect. We want you to look at the record, and who knows, you might find a chlamydia test result that's been accidentally filed, which is what happened in our practice, or a patient who did have diabetes and we've forgotten to do something about it. And you can flag it up and say, Doc, this is raised here. Does that mean anything? Don't get angry. Don't sue us. Say, let's work together, partnership of trust, and let's do something about that diabetes and that test result. It's a free-for-all. No, it isn't. We're going to test you. I have an explicit consent process. You have to demonstrate that you're able to understand that data before we let you have a look at it. There are no guidelines. Actually, there are. They're on the Record Access Collaborative website. We've made them available. They're actually, at the moment, being quality assured by the Royal College of GPs. And I'd like to be able to say in a few weeks' time it will be assured, and the guidelines will be there for patients, clinicians, and the system. And they won't understand it. Well, let's make it dead certain that people do start to understand it. Those fears are amongst patients, clinicians, and the system, and we together are the solution. So what are the secrets for success? Well, firstly, technology is not a problem. At least in this country it isn't, because all our GP practices are fully IT integrated. That may be different in other countries. The important thing is the technology is not the issue here. There is an issue about proportionality. There is an issue about your right to confidentiality and privacy, and my job is absolutely to uphold that. But at the same time, it's also to provide safe care so that after 6 o'clock on a Friday night, if you turn up to A&E or the out of hours, you can provide information to that doctor or nurse that can help them sort you out while your GP is not available. And that's part about delivering great care. We need to move towards a can-do attitude and try to manage some of those fears and convert them into success stories. We need to think about the aging population, global recession, and things like the iPhone, the iPad. The technology is available now for us all to be able to access those records. And I think those are the key determinants in society that are going to enable that change to happen. I think the time for record access has come. I do think the media, social media such as Twittering, blogging and whatnot, and the public has a huge role in supporting the medical profession, enabling us to do this, even because we are worried just as some people in society are. We're going to overcome those fears by talking about them and working through them, supporting each other. And I do firmly believe that this isn't just something about what I'm doing inside Hyde, but actually it's part of a global movement. I just want to finish with this story, with this picture. This is a patient of mine. This isn't a patient. I had a patient of mine who was in a nursing home, and her next of kin, who had power of attorney, was her niece, who lived in Australia. And she gave access to a record so that she was able to keep an eye on her aunt's condition, even though she was on the other side of the planet. Unfortunately, she died, and we'd had email exchanges around how to do this. I'd never seen her. She died. She came over from Australia, and when she came over to sort her aunt's details out, she came to the practice, and I've just took this photograph of her in our waiting room underneath a plasma screen showing that the record can be accessed in other parts of the world. Isn't that a great story? Finally, isn't it time that, forget whatever role you've come in, isn't it time that you start to get access to your own records and you go back to your own doctor or nurse and say, can I have access to my records? And try and support yourself and your family and enter what I call real-time digital medicine. Thank you very much. I've just written a paper in Informatics in Primary Care describing how we got the first 900 patients in the practice. I'm sure that'll be very useful for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Amir. That was a really great presentation. And as a journalist, isn't it fantastic to see somebody in a authority, in an institution, who's so open to sharing their data? And, you know, this is a very responsible type of sharing, you know, around patient records. So thank you very much for that. Bit of a change of pace now, perhaps, with Jordan, who's going to be looking at the rewards and challenges of transparency from a more legal perspective. So.
Thanks. Yeah, so I probably won't take too legal of a perspective, actually, even though my background is as a technology lawyer. I'm also on the board of the Open Knowledge Foundation. And if you don't know us, we're a nonprofit foundation based here in the UK with one goal: to promote open knowledge. And hopefully I'll do a bit of future gazing as well. When Julian sort of gave me the brief of what I should talk about today, he said to talk about around this theme of the rewards and challenges of transparent culture. And I started to think about it a bit more, and really what we do at the Open Knowledge Foundation is we raise the bar higher than something simply just being transparent. So as in being accessible, we set the bar quite high in that we have a set definition for what something that's open means. And that's called the open definition. So it's at opendefinition.org. And it means more than just something being accessible, like being able to download data off of a website, for example. At its heart, it means that you as a user have the right to use, reuse, and redistribute that work. Commercial use is allowed. And attribution and share-alike specific types of legal requirements are generally okay. I think it's interesting to compare it to the last presentation in that really medical records and medical data are not what I'm talking about, right? So you don't want to have anyone in the world with the right to be able to use, reuse, and redistribute your medical records. This is for different stuff, but all the same important stuff, and there's plenty of it out there. So in terms of some of the rewards, just kind of a highlight, when people are out there releasing data, so governments in particular are releasing data right now, so this is data.gov.uk, which it's open data, right? So they've chosen to use a license that says the only thing that you have to do if you take data from this website is give them credit for it. This is also the approach given by the World Bank recently, released a bunch of development data as well, and there's lots of information out there. I think that here in the UK, we've done a particularly good job at government data so far. There's lots of work still to be done, but just in comparison to the US data.gov site, I think data.gov.uk puts it to shame, just as the sheer amount of really useful stuff that's out there. Now, in terms of what you can do when you start having access to this data, there's tons and tons of stuff out there. I'm just going to touch on a few. This is a project of the Open Knowledge Foundation. Where Does My Money Go? It was a winner of the Show Us a Better Way competition. And it just has some really neat visualizations around UK public sector spending. And I think that this is an example of one of the benefits of opening up data in particular is just this idea of greater civic engagement, right? So getting people to participate in democracy even more. And there are sort of other examples around that with the past election. I want to touch on some others around accountability and transparency, right? So farmsubsidy.org and fishsubsidy.org, not OKF projects, so we've worked with them some. They essentially file a lot of freedom of information requests to basically, it's like pulling teeth to get a lot of the data around the common agricultural policy out of all of the member governments of the EU. And they take that data and make it accessible, transparent, and open under the open definition, so legally open for you to use and redistribute. And they find out lots of interesting stuff, right, about royalty in various countries receiving disproportionate amounts of EU money. Another project, Aid Info, they're looking at this idea of foreign aid, right? There's a lot of inefficiency in how governments spend foreign aid money. Some of it gets duplicated. Some of it's not tracked very well once it goes into the various countries. And it's not really easy to identify sort of areas where there's getting a lot of funding and then the areas that are neglected. And so they're working in ways of trying to make that data transparent as well. And I think that can really show sort of the power of data around accountability. There's lots of other projects out there. So 4IP have Who Do They Know, which is a really interesting project. Sort of a tip of the iceberg around both government spending and accountability and transparency in that area. So what are the extra benefits of making this knowledge that's out there open knowledge? So going the extra step and not just having it accessible on a website, but affirmatively saying, this knowledge, this data, for example, I'm giving you the legal right to do whatever you want with it. One example from the US, so Diebold has electronic voting machines. They tried to use copyright law, so IP law. This ties into what Tim was saying, to silence criticism about the security flaws within their system. So as an example, you're upfront from a government perspective saying we're not going to use these sort of tools that may be at our disposal to try to censor discussion around this issue, because that's not possible if it's actually open knowledge. You can think of MPs' expenses as well, possibly in this area. And what are some of the rewards? I want to talk about some of the commercial end of things. So I work with a lot of businesses as well that deal in open data, as well as nonprofits that are just worried about the sustainability of producing that data. And I want to draw a lesson from the open source community in that there's valid commercial models around just having open as your default setting, right? So Red Hat is an open source company. They've got about $5.5 billion of market capitalization. They're a big company, and it's all built around open source licenses, which are similarly the same thing as open knowledge. I think that sort of thinking about the app economy, which is definitely growing, and the really sort of cool part about this idea of just being able to build iPhone apps, for example, is that it enables lots of small independent developers to reach a really huge market and build businesses around that. Open data I see as a key component for this moving forward. So in terms of both the app economy and what people are going to do with things going forward, you see things like OpenStreetMap, which is like an Wikipedia, but for mapping online collaborative space to really map some really interesting stuff. And there are already companies, many companies, sort of building off the back of this data, like ITO World and CloudMade and others. So we'll kind of see where all that ends up. In terms of the challenges, I think that, let's see. My slide seems to have disappeared. In terms of challenges, privacy is a key challenge, right? So this is an example. Project Gaydar, right? So this is some MIT researchers with brain the size of a planet went through some Facebook data and were able to, with some really relatively innocuous data about the around the age of your friends and the sex of your friends, identify with a fairly high degree of accuracy your sexual orientation, right? So the bar gets stretched quite a bit in terms of things that people release that may seem okay at first, but eventually reveal private information that you may not want to release. Netflix had a big competition, a data competition around taking the data set of who rented what, which was fairly successful from a technology standpoint, right? So they had an open competition, lots of people. They had a big prize to try to win a lot of money to get their recommendation engine a whole lot better. They had to pull the second version of the competition because, again, some university researchers figured out a way to get a lot of private information just based on your rental histories. So privacy can be a huge problem, but it's also one that I think, doing a bit of future gazing, is interesting to kind of think about generational shifts and how we view privacy and privacy online. Some of the challenges, so on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Just to kind of go back to the New Yorker cartoon from a number of years ago, I think a challenge specific for open data is a challenge that is specific for the internet in general, in that there's no there, right? So there's no law of cyberspace that applies. You potentially have the law of 181 countries that apply when you transact on cyberspace, and that can be a huge problem. It can be a stumbling block of just trying to comply with very different law in very different jurisdictions. And that's for individuals as well as for businesses. Just to kind of pick back up on the point about Digital Britain, the Digital Economy Act is sort of but one example of how legislators and regulators are increasingly expecting you, as the general public, to actually know quite a bit about IP law, right? So they're expecting you to know whether or not you've infringed a copyright, which is actually can be quite a hard thing to figure out at times, especially if your use comes under an exception. And that this approach, I think, it's a problem. It's a complicated area of law, and it requires a high level of expertise, and the consequences can be severe. So beyond just disconnecting your internet connection, right, you can face civil and even criminal penalties. And that, I think, is a problem. This is incidentally sort of one of the areas where I think that open licensing, which is the area that I work a lot in with my project, opendatacommons.org, comes into play. And then we're really trying to lower that barrier. So in terms of having to have this deep background on, say, copyright law, or try to make an assessment of whether or not something that you want to use is potentially infringing and could land you in hot water, that's done for you through an open license. So it just sort of makes the whole process easier, hopefully, especially for new app developers. So that's me, and I have some credits to play. Thanks.
Our final speaker is Chris, who's from Openly Local. And although he did tell me he's going to talk about failure, I think it actually might be a little bit more upbeat than that. And we'll talk about some of the work he's been doing with council data particularly. We are going to have to kind of keep it quite short in order to get some questions in, though. So we'll just warn you.
Do you know how I get the slides presentation up on here?
Is there anybody who can...
Yeah, but this is the wrong one.
While that's setting up, does anybody want to throw a question in on what we've seen so far? Because we're in danger of running out of time otherwise. Yes, over there.
Yes.
Louise. Yeah. I'd like to know how uniform across Manchester the health data is being opened up. Because in my surgery in South Manchester, they've got a website which is part of the Manchester NHS site, but there's no possibility to book appointments online or do any of the other things that you've demonstrated to us in your own surgery. So I'd like to know if your situation is fairly unique, or if my surgery is just completely out of step with the rest of Manchester. How widespread is it?
Okay. The clinical system that we've got is a particular, I don't want to particularly mention it on camera, but 60% of GP practices in the country have that particular system. And they've made the technology available for any of those practices to enable their patients to offer the same service, booking appointments, ordering prescriptions, and accessing the records. In practical terms, I'm told that 4,000 practices around the country are already offering booking appointments and ordering prescriptions. In terms of accessing the records, there's about 40 practices around the country that are doing it. To give you some sort of idea, in Tameside and Gloucester, a population of about 150,000 patients, we've got about 49 practices, and at the moment, 3 practices are offering the service that we've got, the full service. There's another 4 practices that are about to come online, and then there's another 2 that are thinking about it. So we are very much at innovator stage in terms of numbers. My feeling is that it's patients and the public. It's you going into your GP practice, talking to the practice manager. If you've got patient participation groups, getting involved and saying, could we bring this along? In the 60% of practices that could offer it, that will encourage it. The other 40%, let's have a bit of competition. Let's encourage the other system suppliers to do the same. The point I'm making is the technology is here. It's the culture that isn't.
Thank you. Right, Chris.
Okay, failure. Specifically, the rewards failure, which there's been a lot about in the press recently. So, I'm Chris Taggart. I'm Count Culture on Twitter. This presentation will be on SlideShare under an open license sometime later today. I'm the developer of a site called Openly Local, which opens up local government data and makes it available in a consistent, accessible form. We basically scrape council government websites,
and get the information from there. Everything's open data. You can get it in a variety of formats from JSON, XML, RDF. We also do hyperlocal site directory and have got quite close links with the whole hyperlocal movement because we're providing data for them, and we're also trying to tie in the sort of stories that they do together with the councillors that they're doing them on, and so on and so forth. I'm also the person behind the Open Election Data Project, which is a project to try and help local authorities to publish their election results as open data, because there isn't a data set of those things, a public data set of local election results, and because local authorities are starting to want to publish open data. And it's a relatively small project, but it's about tackling one problem at a time and learning lessons from that. And we're, the data that's been published, we're pulling that in, and we'll be making that available as a data set to download as a CSV file or XML or whatever. I'm also a member of the local public data panel, which hasn't got a lot to show for itself so far, but hopefully will do. Okay, why do we want open data? Well, there's a Tim Berners-Lee thing. It's our data. Give us it now. It's about engagement. It's so much easier to engage, to get involved, if there's tools for you to do that that make it trivial. It's about equality of access to information. All this stuff, who your councillor is, what committees they sit on, who's got what contracts and so on, it's all available at the moment at a price. And that price is good for those people who can afford it, because they've got something that the other people don't have. It's also about it's also about reducing inefficiency, and there's so much, since on the work I've been doing on the local data panel, there's so much duplication of work simply because people aren't sharing or can't share the data with each other, or sometimes won't share it. But key thing is transparency, and it's not just so we can see what's going on; it's also so we can understand it. I just want to look at this slide for a second. This is the contracts database of the Northwest Partnership. They're called REAPs, Regional Enterprise Partnerships. You probably can't see it from here. You'll see it on the side spreadsheet. It's got contract details, you know, who the person that the council is, and value and so that. Do you know what it doesn't have on it? Who the contract's with. It doesn't mention anywhere, and there is no way of getting, except via a freedom of information request, who the contract's with. Not company, nothing. Never mind the company number, so you can actually uniquely identify it. I mean, you could just go on forever about the transparency and the harm that not having it is causing us. So why haven't we got all this? Well, because some people don't want us to have it. I mean, you know, it's common sense. It's like, why? You know, often I hear people say, well, why would we want to make this available? Why on earth would we want to do it? You know, why would we want to let people see what we're doing badly, what we're doing wrong? You know, why would we want to get other people to have power that we've currently got? You know, from their perspective, you know, why don't they want us to have it? You know, we say it's our data. No, they say we collected it, and what's more, it's what gives us the power. That's why they don't want us to have it. They don't want that engagement because it reduces the power of the political and the public service elite. You know, they don't want that competitive advantage to disappear. You know, efficiency, that's great, but what does that mean? It means that your department's got fewer people. Your area's got fewer people. You know, these people are going off to do other things. It means that you don't have to make difficult decisions. You know, who are you going to get rid of? What are you going to do? But it also particularly means you're, you know, in charge of a small department, or maybe actually your department doesn't need to exist anymore, or your area, or what you're doing doesn't need to exist anymore, and you've got less power, you've got less prestige. The most scary of all for them is the transparency thing. You know, we see what's going on and understand it, and actually we can really see how bad things are. So there are lots of rewards of failure, and this is typically how rewards of failure works at the moment. There's incentives to do big projects
I mean, this here is what I sort of imagine that when you go into public service, particularly into government public service, you get talked through these things, or pretty soon you learn this. This is how it works. You do big projects and policy initiatives because they bring lots of media attention, and they bring power and they bring influence. And the good thing is, as well, is by the time the failure is publicly recognised, is that all the key people have moved on onto other jobs. By doing big things, by emphasising process over results, by scoping everything out to the nth degree, you spread the risk. It's not your fault. This failure isn't associated with you. And when I went to the first local public data meeting, someone said to me, the thing is, what you've got to realise is people don't get, there's no benefit to people for doing good things, for doing an intellectual challenge. They do things what's good for them, and they don't, and actually they don't get any benefit from doing interesting stuff, from doing good things, of making things better. And actually, what they do get, particularly from the press, is lots of grief for making mistakes or for anything that raises the public attention if something's not quite gone right. And what you mustn't do, don't do small projects, don't do quick, innovative things, because do you know what? It's associated with you. And people can identify that failure, and people can say, that thing you've just done didn't work. Not, okay, something that we did over the course of 5 years, has not turned out quite as well, but we ticked all the boxes, we followed the process. It's too difficult to spread the blame when it's a small, innovative project. Oh, and by the way, if you outsource everything, because that's process. We're following the process. We're not favouring. We're doing these big tendering projects. We're scoping things out. We're getting consultancy on the scoped out proposals and so on. And so we outsource everything. And by the way, do you know what? Commercial confidentiality. We don't have to say anything anymore. The data's not available because it's under commercial confidentiality. The FOI, it's not available under FOI because it doesn't cover the commercial outsourced stuff. And actually, the private sector really is no better at all. I mean, one of the things that people say is, oh, look, the public sector is hopeless at this, and we should put it out to the private sector. People say, have you tried dealing with the tax office? Have you seen how frustrating it is? Do you know how frustrating it is? And it's like, yes, I do. It's just like dealing with my bank. It's just like dealing with the telephone company or the broadband company. It's the same thing. The finance industry was incentivized to take risks, to reap short-term rewards and let others bear the consequences. We privatise the profits, we socialise the losses. Big opaque schemes work, and the bigger and the more complex schemes, the schemes are, the more protection they've got because people can't understand them. No one could criticise CDOs and all that sort of stuff before they happened because no one could understand them, not even the people that were getting involved in them. Nobody knew that Enron was a house of cards until it all collapsed because no one could understand it. Senior executives are insulated from shareholders. Maybe there's a vote on the remuneration, but that'll be all, and that vote won't be binding. And so people at the top are really incentivised to make big changes, to make comparison difficult. And the people at the bottom, well, they're incentivised to do what they're told, because that way they might get slightly higher up the rung. So this is what failure should be about. And the more I deal with this, the more I realise that open source has got enormous lessons for us in how we do this, because it's been founded on failure. It's been founded on, actually, this is what we're going to do, but there'll be mistakes. Or there's this problem, it's not working, let's try and solve it ourselves. And one of the things that we've got with open source is we've got incredible stability. I mean, there's a reason why the servers running the internet use open source and use Linux and so on, because they're incredibly stable. And stability is important when you're talking about the public sector and talking about government. But it's failure in public, and that makes all bugs shallow, all faults visible. The most secure encryptions we've got are the ones that have been tested and that have been published. It's also about letting the good show and incentivizing innovation, saying, you know what, I'm going to do this, and because I'm going to do this and people are going to see it, I'm going to do a good job. And there is no incentive at the moment because it's all done in private, and the only things that ever show are those errors. You don't get rewarded for doing good stuff. And the other thing is that the whole structure of the internet, both from a technical and from a philosophical point of view, if you like, is that it accepts failure. Do you know what? There's a link. It doesn't work. It doesn't matter. This computer goes down. It doesn't matter. The web, it's about, do you know what? This page, the HTML that someone's written here, it doesn't work. It doesn't matter. It's all about accepting a failure and about learning from that failure too. Your page doesn't work? Okay, well, Google won't bother searching it. That's fine. You're disincentivized to have bad HTML. So the open data, it's about changing the incentives. We want to stop this fail big, fail slow, to fail small, fail fast, and fail forward. And that's about building on failure, doing small failure and understanding it and learning what the lessons are from there. It's about surfacing the issues and the problems and making them less likely to be repeated. All these, people say, oh, I'm not sure about releasing this data because I'm not sure it's right. Yes, of course you're not sure it's right. How are you going to find out if it's right? You have to publish it. This thing that you've just screwed up on, okay, or not that you screwed up on, didn't work. I mean, if you're in the commercial world, and my background is in business as an entrepreneur, if you're in the commercial world, you know that most of the things, a high proportion of the things that you're going to try aren't going to work. That's fine. And why do people sell TV? I heard this interview on the radio the other day about somebody who sells TV formats around the world. Why do people buy them? He said, well, what are people buying these things for? And they said, well, they're buying our failures. That's what they're doing. They're buying our failures because they know, we've discovered that this thing didn't work, that doesn't work, and they're buying the failures to avoid committing them themselves. And particularly when you've got public service, local authorities or government departments, you need those failures to be published so that other departments aren't going to carry on, aren't going to repeat them. I've been doing websites for a few years now, but 3 or 4 years now, and I couldn't possibly do it if I wasn't using other people's work, other people's software tools, other people's libraries. Just been doing some stuff with RDF and linked data. I didn't write a library myself how to do it. I just used someone else, and it was there. It was open data. And do you know what? I found a few problems, and we've sent some information back to them, and they've made some changes. And I've done some stuff, and they've done some stuff, and people have built on what I've done, and people have built on what I mean. It's about not reinventing the wheel. You just want to make the you want to take someone else's wheel and say make it better, or make it work better for you. And this thing about data, crowdsourcing, getting people to combine your data with someone else, that's how you're going to find out the data's wrong. Because suddenly this thing doesn't make sense. Someone's done a visualization, wait a minute, that's shown some really screwy figures, and it's because there's been a mistake, and it would have never been identified otherwise. It's far, far cheaper than internal checking. So finally, I just want to talk about we need to change the terms of this debate, of what we're talking about. It's about being upfront about the problems. I mean, if I was running a hospital, I'd say, okay, here's some non-personal data that we can publish. We'll talk about hospital admissions. Let's talk about what time of the day things are happening. We'll publish some of this stuff. Because do you know what? We need to run this hospital better. And I'd be saying to people, I'd say, do you know what? I'm going to put £10,000 to someone who can help, taking the Netflix approach, basically. We need to run this hospital better. Here's £10,000 for someone who can help me run this hospital better. Look at this data and tell me things that aren't working. We know things aren't working, but we don't have the skills, we don't have the time to do this. Help us do that. Be upfront about the knowledge gaps and the issues that you're facing. Less centralised complexity and more distributed innovation. That's very much about the web and that whole approach. We need to make public data open by default, and that includes the outsourced work. Otherwise, what will happen is that more and more work will be outsourced because there's a benefit to doing that. And also, it's the only way that we're going to find out whether these outsourced deals are good or not. You know, I mean, anyone that's looked at transfer pricing knows that, you know, it's about the used car, the lemon problem it's called, and Stiglitz and various other people won a Nobel Prize about that. Basically, someone that's selling a used car knows more about the faults than the buyer does. And that's true about when you're outsourcing stuff to an area where the supplier knows more about it than you do. You know, we need to stop this whole thing of vendoritis where you're being sold solutions rather than you're trying to find ways of making your life and your services better. And we really need to reward small-scale innovation. We need to make it worthwhile people to be sticking their heads and say, I'm going to try this, and you know what, there's a pretty good chance it'll fail, but someone else will learn from that failure. And, you know, you can do a lot for £5,000, for £50,000. You can do more in many ways for £50,000 you can for £500,000. So we need less of this. This is the PowerPoint. This is actually the US Army came to the realization that their PowerPoint was making them do everything wrong. And this is the alternative. This is a visualization of 5 years of commits in Git which is a source control management system, but for 5 years of changes of commits to Linux kernel. And it's just people doing things, joining, trying things. Some things work, some things don't work. It's distributed, you know, and you know what? If the guy in the middle failed, which is the guy behind Linux, Linus Torvalds, it wouldn't actually matter. Other spokes would soon join up. It wouldn't actually matter. That's it.
Okay, we'll throw this open for questions. Could I ask that if you've got a particular panellist in mind that you say who it is, and also just introduce yourself? Do we have a microphone for the audience? Okay. So, any questions?
Yes. Hi. I already have the microphone, so I'll ask. I have a question for Dr. Hannan. Basically, we're here in a panel called OpenEverything and in a festival called FutureEverything. And you mentioned some of the people that are kind of concerned about this openness from the side of also from the side of power. But I'm kind of concerned that we here in the room and in this festival, we have a lot to gain from this openness, and we are more media savvy and we are more stable economically. And then, like your patient, who felt completely okay to speak about her vulnerabilities online, not through a safe environment that saves privacy. We are pushing people to open everything by creating this culture that would open everything. And while we that have a lot to gain from it, those who are actually do have something to hide, and not because they're terrorists, are being left behind. And I would like you and the rest of the panelists maybe to address that.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question. When I sort of scan the discussion and debate that's going on in society, whether it's in the press or in private discussions or even inside consultations, it all seems to be around we need to protect that private data. And as a GP, you know, if that private... I mean, I've had, for instance, a GP who didn't know me stick on a blog 2-3 years ago. We've got to stop this, Dr. Hannan, otherwise everyone's sexual histories will be available on Google for everyone to see, which absolutely isn't what we're talking about. But that's the fear culture that's out there, and my job is to protect your data. And of course, that's fine, but come 6 o'clock at night on a Friday, I protect that data so well that nobody can access it, and it's of no use to anybody. Now let's just twist it around. I got a phone call a few months ago in the middle of surgery, and it had come from France. It's the first time a doctor in France from abroad had rang me. And he said, Dr. Hannan, one of your patients has been on holiday, it's during the daytime, He's had chest pains and he's been admitted into a foreign hospital. He's been transferred from the A&E department into the coronary care unit. We've put him on all sorts of drugs and drips and everything else. And if you can imagine that picture of an individual in a foreign country where they don't speak English and he's stuck on the coronary care unit, and this chap is saying to me he wants to put some passwords into a website so he can access his medical records, what the hell is he talking about? It's not possible. What I want to do is move that debate away from just talking about protecting information. I absolutely have a duty of care to protect that information, but let's also start talking about how we can share that information and make it available. I've talked about something inside the practice, but of course we've also got the Summary Care Record, the National Programme for IT, that £20 billion project. Well, 1.2 million records have gone up to the spine. Those patients can actually access the summary information. Now, to my mind, the ones who've done that, it's the first opportunity that they've got to be able to access some information, not just to be able to see it, but to be able to say, yes, that's correct. Those are the conditions I've got. That is the medication I'm on. Oh, look, it doesn't say that I'm allergic to penicillin when I should be. Maybe I should go and see the GP and tell him to put that information on so that if I call 999 and an ambulance crew come because I've got meningitis, they're not going to whack penicillin into me because I'm allergic to it. So let's have more of that discussion around the opportunities of if we can share some of that data. But let's think about proportionality too. We're not talking about open, fully open. What bits are we okay with? What are we not okay with? Do you really want the fact that you've had an STD available for everyone to see? There's got to be some limits. And my argument is that we want that open discussion with the public and patients, as well as the medical profession and perhaps the legal companies and the Information Commissioner's Office and people like that, to try and get that balance right.
Really, I just agree with everything you've just said.
I'll pass the mic on. I'll just say, did you address your patient that posted these things online in the public and tell her that maybe she needs to rethink about this approach of opening everything?
Yeah, what's really, really, really interesting, I did a talk at Addenbrooke's last year, and in the audience was the ex-editor of the British Medical Journal. The day after I did the presentation, he did a fantastic blog. In fact, on my practice website, halfway down the middle, it says Health Record Access, and you can see my consent process. But there's a link there to the BMJ blog. My patients responded to that blog and started describing things. I am very clear to my patients, explaining to them that my job is to protect your information, but my job isn't to tell them what to do. It's up to them to decide what they want to publish and where and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's back to this thing about society needs to get it right. You in the audience have as much a duty as I do to try and support them in ensuring we get the balance right. So I often do say to patients that you don't need to talk about your condition, but rather talk about what made you do that. You talked about making knowledge available, or I think it was yourself. I'm starting to think about the skills and attitudes that are necessary to make that knowledge available. And we need to start thinking about teaching patients and the public as well as clinicians on that.
Yep, hi, my name is Steve Rawling. I work for the BBC in Manchester. There's a question for Chris. What's the difference between open data and targets? When you're talking about public organisations like police, education, health, we know that targets over the last 10 years skew behaviour. Police officers behave in a different way because they've got a target, and schools behave in different ways because of league tables. Doctors behave in different ways because of performance targets that they've got. What's the difference between that and open data?
I think it's fun. I mean, look at schools, for example. If you go to a school or look at an organisation, when you work within that organisation, you get you understand a lot more about it than you do the outside view of it. And essentially, those targets are proxies. They're a simple measure that is just giving you a quick glance at one particular aspect of it, and what it's doing is giving you an aspect of the equation, if you like, that produced that figure. It doesn't actually tell you what's going on. It's just what has been produced for it, and the thing about open data is it allows you to have a much deeper look at it. It also allows critically to analyse the data in different ways. People can say, actually, do you know what? You're taking that skew on it, but we're taking this skew on it. maybe they're even diametrically opposed to those views, but it allows people to take those different views. And I'm sure we will discover all sorts of unforeseen consequences that some measures, some people will be looking at the data and standard analyses of data, or somebody will be, producing these figures. But it allows you to draw other conclusions and look at take other ways of looking at it.
What I should have perhaps the question is, do you think it could alter the way organisations behave in a negative way? The fact that they start behaving in order to get better results from the data that they're publishing?
I think the more granular the data is, just putting aside the privacy concerns at the moment and the personal data, the more granular the data is, the more closely you're modelling what's happening in the organisation. And, so you'd ultimately get, we'll never be at this position, obviously, but you'd ultimately get actually what is happening in that organisation. So what you want the organisation, whether it's a company, a council, or a charity, or whatever, to be working as well as it possibly can, and to be doing the best job it possibly can. And ultimately, if the data was at a sufficient level of granularity, it would allow you to see whether that was happening. Now, there are obviously balances that need to be drawn between personal data and other various aspects together with that. But I think generally my belief is that more granularity gives you a better idea of what's going on.
We've got time for 2 more questions. Yeah, 2 more questions. Anyone?
Can I just add a comment to that? The NHS was very into target-based culture, but we're now changing from that to a value-based culture. I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussion and debate around what's the value, because it's a much more esoteric thing to measure and understand. But maybe that's where we need to start to move towards, is where's the value and how can we improve the value of whatever the transaction is.
So if there's no more questions, no? Well, I'd just like to say thank you to all panellists for their time and presentations. I think it's been a very stimulating session, so thank you very much.
Could I just add, I brought some newsletters here that my patients in the practice are picking up. There is a value to paper as well, so if anyone wants to pick up something, they can do. Thank you.